So when we started Digantra, we didn't have a lot of access to the US. While it was easier to work with European companies, it was very difficult to work with the United States because of a lot of export control regulations and paperwork associated with that also impacts timeline on technology development. Having said that, US being the largest market within the space industry for any commercial company, it was very important for us to solve for having an entity there to be able to access a larger portion of the market. So that's how we went about approaching this particular problem. With that, a lot of private companies today, like although they are working on bridge programs like IndusX, where you have India, US coming together, giving a challenge and working on it, it is still not happening at scale where a commercial company can rely on this totally. So it's just a foot into the door, but then you have to figure out yourself. So I personally think that the models that we have today, be it with ISET, IndusX, is not a scalable model. And we've not seen that scale even with IDEX challenge yet, like at least within the space industry, because when you're doing something like this challenge, there needs to be a further roadmap around how can you change this from a challenge to a technology that is adapted for the military or for that particular end user. That adaptation is still a problem. So until we solve for that, you don't see anything happening at scale out of these programs, while you still have to be focused on becoming that one defense contractor who is focused towards solving bigger problems than these smaller challenges.
We have a few minutes left, so I think I have space for one more question. So Ambassador Van Deelen, this is to you. As I said at the beginning of this panel discussion, we're entering an era of astropolitics, highly contested, and a lot will depend on partnerships, alliances, and norms. The EU College of the Commissioners was in India recently, including the EU Commissioner for Defense and Space. They spoke about possibly doing something as a partnership with India. What would collaboration on space security with India look like in the future?
Yeah, indeed. The visit of the College of Commissioners, I think, was a key moment that really shows how the EU is interested in cooperating with India in many, many fields, but including space. And I think space was specifically mentioned at those discussions. I work at the EEAS, which is the diplomatic and defense arm of the EU, and we cooperate very closely with what's called DG DEFIS of the Commission that runs the EU space program. And the strategy that I mentioned is something that is implemented jointly by the two of us. We would really see merit in coming jointly to India to sit down and to look across all these areas of work, how we can best cooperate with the Indian partners. So as I mentioned, that would look like, as a start, a dialogue where we sit down, speak on many issues related to running space programs, but also to space security. And as you mentioned before, space is a global commons. So as EU, we really believe that we need to solve the challenges we face jointly with other countries. And India would be an excellent partner for that. We also, the way the EU works, when we set up a partnership, it's a partnership. It's based on mutual interest. We're in there for the long haul. We work on it step by step. That is how we operate, and that is what we really like to do in India.
Thank you. With that, we're almost at the end of our time. I guess the main takeaway seems to be that, discussions are ongoing, space is evolving, the tech, the regulation, everything else. All I'll say is I'll close with watch this space. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Now our day moves in a different direction, a DPI direction. We now move into a conversation titled DPI and Climate Change. It's my honor to welcome to the stage Guilherme Alberto Almeida de Almeida, Program Director, Ministry of Management and Innovation in Public Services, Brazil. Sujit Nair, Chief Executive Officer and co-founder, Foundation for Interoperability in Digital Economy. The conversation will be moderated by Rahul Mathan, partner Trilegal. Please come to the stage. May I have the video, please? Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be back at GTS, and we're going to do a slightly different kind of a panel. The context of this panel was sort of set by Nandan in his remarks in passing when we opened GTS. He spoke briefly about, in his conversation with Yanka, about the idea of a DPI for climate. And I want to take a moment to put this in context. We have a very significant year in climate this year. It is the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. It is the time when countries of the world have to reaffirm their commitments, as it were, to climate. The way in which the Paris Agreement is designed to work is that countries have to ratchet up the seriousness and significance of their commitments to bringing down the temperature to within 1.5 degrees centigrade of pre-industrial levels. And this is the time when they have to reaffirm those commitments. Now, as it happens, it is also, as we've heard from the beginning of the day, I was just telling Rudy, this is a terribly depressing way to start the second day of GTS. But it is a fairly depressing time, and perhaps some of that rolls into climate as well. One of the requirements of climate is climate finance. And we know that one of the biggest contributors to that is walking out of the Paris Agreement. And so at this particular time, we have to reimagine, seriously reimagine, the way in which climate is done. Because the fact that temperatures are rising is absolutely obvious and evident. The fact that yesterday we had to shut down the party on the terrace because there was a dust storm that actually killed someone has to have some explanation. And we have to do something about it. And as we said in the early panel, when you're given lemons, you make lemonade. Once the egg is broken, you make an omelette. And we have to find a way to do that. And Brazil has the unenviable task of leading the world in that. And what's really remarkable about Brazil is that Brazil has chosen the opportunity to pivot. And I'm just going to read very briefly a submission that Brazil made in relation to mitigation. I'm just reading from there. They're saying, digital platforms can be used to promote sustainable practices, to facilitate the adoption of decentralized renewable energy systems, to share evidence-based information about climate change. Brazil has successful experiences and creative solutions involving DPI for forest protection and restoration. Brazil is convinced that including the topic of DPI in the discussion on forest protection and restoration presents an opportunity to reflect on the barriers that developing economies face in deploying, leveraging, and maintaining such solutions. This is live on the climate website, which means that a DPI for climate that Nandan briefly mentioned is actually already a reality in the conversation. We have a very short amount of time to cover this, and I've got two people who have rich experience in two ends of the spectrum. And I'm going to first turn to Guy, who is in the department that is responsible for the DPI for climate that was mentioned in what I just read out, and that is CAR, which is the Rural Agricultural Registry. So Guy, I want you to just put it in context just remember that in this audience, I don't think very many people have seen what a rainforest is, certainly not a rainforest as large as the one that you have. I understand that your rainforest is so big that it can fit India in it. And if that is the size of the climate contribution, what exactly is the problem that CAR has set out to solve?
Well, thank you, Raul, and thanks Carnegie and Ministry of External Affairs for inviting us here. I guess what we are tackling in Brazil regularly, and particularly on the path to COP30, is how to implement preservation policies which are effective. And when you have such huge environmental assets such as the Amazon forest, and I just calculated, I think it's 1 India and a half within the Brazilian portion of the Amazon rainforest. So you need to establish monitoring and protection institutions which encompass not only policies but also digital systems. Particularly in Brazil, and I think this is somehow different around the world, you have strong preservation policies. So every single landholder is supposed to preserve areas within their properties, namely riverbanks, top of hills, and so on, but also a mandatory percentage of their land should be either preserved, or if it's not, it should be restored, right, it's recovered. So in order to monitor those commitments, we implemented more than 10 years ago the Rural Environmental Registry. So every single landowner is required to, in a geo-referenced manner, to disclose not only which are the boundaries for his, her, or their property, but also where are the preserved areas, which areas are used for mandatory preservation within their properties. So far, that leads up to 7.5 million more than 7.5 million registries so far, which cover nearly 80% of the Brazilian territory, which is probably the largest database on privately owned forests in the world. So it's a treasure trove of information for climate purposes, but only mentioning where forests are is not enough. Right? You just mentioned that finance is crucial whenever we're leveraging incentives for preservation. So we are working and have been establishing several incentive mechanisms to make that preservation to happen. For instance, if you are applying for a rural loan, if you want to finance your crops, you need to have such registry. And we've been working together with COS here to expedite that process by providing verifiable credentials in that context so that we can expeditely make this rural loans process even more important and expedite. Also, you need to have validated information on the territory. So, and we've been working together as well with NORAD on that to make sure that we have not only accurate information, but we can use DPIs for georeferencing systems so that could be used abroad. And finally, if you manage to have preserved land, people who have surpluses, they can trade those surpluses. Or if you have preserved areas through time, you're either entitled to payment for environmental services, and we've been working with UNDP for that, or it could even become a ledger for carbon markets. So you mentioned at the beginning that there might be a DPI for climate. I would say, I amend that by saying that there are DPIs for climate. So the idea of bundling together several DPI-powered approaches to that can help us to enforce that basic commitment which Brazil has and that might become global, like private property should also have environmental commitments on mitigation and preservation, and then support financial mechanisms to make that to come true. I think this is a initial vision for reference.
It's amazing. We started talking about DPI, but really the more we dig, we find many countries have adopted this particular approach to a lot of problems. And I think this is one of the biggest problems. I think the beautiful thing about what you're doing and continuing to do, particularly with verifiable credentials, is that this is likely to feed into, now the European Union has a requirement that exported crops must be deforestation free. And a verifiable credential could really work to certify that.
That's the elegance of a DPI approach, right? Whenever the system is in place, it can serve multiple purposes. It can serve traceability, it can serve carbon markets, financing, protecting the forest, monitoring, AI powering reflections on climate. We were discussing Open AgriNet earlier on, and it totally connects with the information which might be there. So when we realize that connecting the dots is the way forward, we are on our way to COP30.
And look, if we're saying it's going to cost 5 trillion to cure the economy, we really don't have 5 trillion. But with this, we could perhaps cure it for much, much less. And really, that's the idea of what DPI does. It unlocks the abundance that is already there within society.
And more than that, I think collaboration is crucial to that. I just mentioned a few partners around here, and there are more and more, much more people have been discussing the role and importance of DPI for climate. And working together towards a common goal is part of the equation, because as I heard, we need exponential solutions for exponential problems, right?
We need exponential solutions. So if we need exponential solutions, just one solution is not good enough. I'm going to turn to Sujit, because we also have another really complicated problem, and that is the fact that our energy system was fixed, as Nandan said, a century and something ago, and it hasn't changed since then. But right now, we're in a very different world where there is renewable solutions that we require, and we need to find a way to fit that in. Once again, we need to do that really efficiently, because cost, once again, needs to be in mind. So Sujit, you have worked on such a solution. Can you do a DG for dummies? Because just assume we're all dummies, and we've got to just understand it from basic principles up.
Sure. No, thanks, Rahul. In the interest of time, I'll save the thank yous for later. But I'm a journalist, so I'm also learning on energy, because this is an idea that came to us from the larger community around the work we do, talking about why aren't you doing anything in energy? And that's when I realized, to your point, we are perhaps in the most unprecedented time when it comes to electricity. People are calling it the new age of electricity. Fixing the grid, decarbonizing the grid, one of the most complex machines built on the planet, especially when you have three important trends shaping the future of the grid. One is rapid decarbonization of the industries, and the concrete pathway of decarbonization of industry has been electrification. Electrification of transportation, refrigeration of industry buildings and plants and all of that. So one is this very clearly a demand surge that is hitting the grid because of the electrification that's happening. Second is this whole idea of everybody can be an energy producer today, because the cost of solar and the cost of batteries, the cost curve declines that we have seen is so unprecedented that it's well within reach to have at a population scale deployment of behind the meter, rooftop solar and batteries. And that's happening at such an unprecedented space, so that you're creating a whole lot of a decentralized energy resources. Conventionally the utility grid has been unidirectional, where you have one big generation plant, and then there's a transmission corridor, and then you have the distribution, and then most of us were like passive customers behind the meter paying the bills. That's the only time the utilities recognize that we exist, to actually we being active consumers and prosumers. So this whole decentralization that's happening, so these three big trends, electrification, decentralization, and the third part, which is the natural digitizations that are happening. And every electric EV car is also a software-driven vehicle. Your thermostats are becoming software controlled. All your systems that take care of your ACs and others are getting software controlled. So there's a natural digitization that's happening. Because of this, we are in a situation where there is a very, very clear case for why the only way to do this at a sustainable scale, at a population scale, and make this this acceleration faster, is to unify these diverse discrete efforts. So what we are seeing is, of course, there are these big grid companies, utilities, and all trying to decarbonize and infuse more renewables into the grid. But parallelly, there is this whole edge grid that's happening behind the meter with all these distributed resources like the batteries and solars and electric cars and everything. They seem to be literally two separate ecosystems not talking to each other. The grid has no visibility behind the meter. Today, when we are talking about solarization of homes, and Prime Minister announced 10 million rooftop solars, The grid guys are getting worried, saying that I don't know when is this solar energy generation is being pushed back into the grid if I have excess energy, to which feeder is it connected to? There's absolutely no observability. And the whole of grid in the last 100 odd years have been working on this very tight supply demand balance, and everything is based on a scheduled generation and management. And we have lost that control, we have lost that observability to manage the supply demand balance when so many millions of micro energy resources are plugging into the grid, either supplying energy or drawing energy or pushing back energy from a battery. So it creates a situation where you have an edge grid actually making the big grid stumble and fall under its own weight. So to unify all of this, the DPI thinking is essential to this idea of how do we unify this discrete diverse energy resources in the edge grid and the big grid come together. And one of the things we have noticed when we are looking at the digitization efforts is literally we are building solutions in silos. Of course, there's an effort on virtual power plants and battery systems connected to the clouds. Everything, all the digitization is happening in silos. It was quite literally like as if we are building a road for every car. And this is the DPI thinking of saying, if we have one general purpose digital energy grid as an infrastructure that takes care of all of this come together on a unified energy rail and make them all come together, I think it'll create a whole new opportunity for not just grid governance and grid management in wake of these new stress that is coming to the grid, but also create a whole new innovation opportunities both in the private sector and public sector. I'll just give you a couple of examples and I'll hand it back to Rahul. One, today we are having conversations about how a floor mill operator in a village who's probably have a rooftop solar and battery to sort of have its own energy security when the grid is unstable, can actually rent out virtually the battery for somebody else to use it to store and retrieve energy. So we are creating what is called as a decentralized battery energy storage systems where even a floor mill operator can participate in a formal energy economy that is taking shape. Similarly, a EV charging operator, a charging point operator, if he's connecting to the grid, is probably getting a brown or a black grid because the grid is not green yet. But specifically for that charging station, he can source energy through this digital energy grid infrastructure to buy it from a remote battery operator and have an electronic transaction to sort of prove that his socket can get green energy because he's actually having an electronic transaction on the protocol that is kind of enabling digital grid to make that happen. So these new ways of imagining possibilities is something unprecedented. So things like peer-to-peer energy, some of the states in India are looking at enabling consumers to trade energy between themselves at a sub-kilowatt level, a sub-megawatt level. And those are some things that can happen if you have common rails. So how do you bring all of them together and accelerate this whole decarbonization effort where you have the businesses, the utilities, governments and regulators all coming together, and all that required one unified digital infrastructure. And that's essentially the idea of digital energy grid. It's again a collection of various set of standards and protocols making this happen. And we already have some live implementations going. We do about 65 megawatt hours of transactions every day. On a live implementation of that grid in India, we have 50 companies forming an alliance to make that happen. And we have these transactions happening, and digital energy grid is actually live and happening. And now there's a conversation we are taking globally and inviting conversations from multiple countries, and of course, a conversation with Brazil and the COP30 team as well. But that's essentially what DEG is.
Sujit, I just want to double down on how you're doing it, just to make it a little more relatable. Sure. You are using the Beacon protocol behind some of this. I think we are all familiar with the Beacon protocol from the ONDC perspective.
Yeah.
But can you very simply, because we don't have time,
yes,
just simply explain how the protocol is helping unify all of these things?
Yeah, so essentially if you look at similar to what we're seeing in ONDC and in energy, you would have an energy producer at one place. It could be a big energy generation company or a local prosumer who has some excess energy on the rooftop. And there's an energy consumer. And if you have millions of them, if they want to have a direct conversation with them, instead of waiting for one big platform to bring everybody together at a population scale, which may not happen, if you want to create a natural conversation between them, Beacon protocol comes in the way of making this consumer-provider interaction on any economic resource happen. In case of digital energy grid, you're talking about energy as a resource. You're also talking about energy-related assets like battery renting, EV charging infrastructure, all of them being accessible. So Beacon protocol as a general purpose transaction value exchange protocol is kind of the spine on which the digital energy grid infrastructure is being envisioned, because Beacon protocol, little did we realize that we'll use it for energy, because it's built as a general purpose consumer provider value exchange protocol as a bunch of specifications, which is what is firing your ONDC and now some of those implementations on DEG.
So this has been a really short teaser, as it were, of how DPI thinking can be applied to just two areas of the climate conversation, both successfully and actually being implemented. We have a long way to go, but a very short time in which to do it. And we're hoping that this has been sort of a teaser for all of you to start thinking about this and seeing how we can apply this sort of thinking to various other areas. I mean, immediately we know loss and damage is a huge issue. When there's a climate disaster, how do we get money to people who really need it? And there's a DPI for that already. It's the G2P payments infrastructure. And so there are many different ways in which we can apply this, and we're hoping that by changing the conversation from what it has been for the last decade to this new way of unlocking abundance, we can actually show how DPI thinking can change the way in which we're having climate conversations. That's all we have to say. We hope by next year we'll have a lot more to say. I would like you all to join me in thanking both Guy and Sujit for doing all of this in such a short time.
Thank you for a timely conversation on DPI and climate change. Up next, we have a short talk titled DPI in Action. It's my privilege to welcome to the stage Mr. Nuruddin Boutayeb, President, Moroccan Foundation for the Promotion of Preschool Education.